This summer, a legend of terror isn't just a campfire story anymore.
They say he smashed his way through the bunk room door, just a mass of flames. Burned alive, cried out, "I will return! I will have my revenge!" He lives on whatever he can catch. Right now, he's out there, watching.
The urban legend of the so-called Cropsey maniac originated as a scary story shared around the fire at summer camp. It tells how a normal man turned into a murderous monster following the devastating loss of his child. He used to be a happy father and husband, but his grief drove him to madness. He became the Cropsey maniac, a terrifying figure who hunts down children that wander off the campgrounds. The legend of Cropsey evolved from a campfire story into a terrifying nightmare that scared the kids of Staten Island, New York in the 70s and 80s. He was believed to be an escaped lunatic from a nearby mental institution, his hand replaced with a menacing hook. He lived in the tunnels underneath the abandoned hospital and was always hunting for children to kidnap and murder. The legend discouraged the kids from exploring near the abandoned buildings, which were full of dangers and mysteries. In the early 1900s, Seaview Hospital was built on an agricultural zone called Willowbrook on Staten Island. It was an isolation hospital for tuberculosis patients, also known as a sanatorium. In 1944, antibiotics were developed to treat tuberculosis, and the number of patients began to decline. In 1947, an adjacent facility was built, a military hospital for World War II veterans. After the end of the war, the facility became the Willowbrook State School, designed to house and treat up to 4,000 children with intellectual disabilities. In the early years of its operation, many children who were placed at the hospital contracted the hepatitis A virus. This virus causes inflammation of the liver. This can cause flu-like symptoms such as fatigue, nausea, and muscle aches, as well as virus-specific symptoms like yellowing of the skin and eyes, severe itching, and abdominal pain from the swelling of the liver. These symptoms can last weeks or even months. It can be life-threatening to anyone with pre-existing liver conditions. The virus is commonly found in the feces of infected individuals. If proper sanitation and hygiene practices are not followed, the virus can contaminate food, water, or surfaces, leading to the spread of the infection to others. This is an indication of the conditions at this facility, but that's only the start of the story. Willowbrook was designed to house about 4,000 patients, but by the 1960s, the population swelled to over 6,000. From 1956 to 1972, medical researchers, led by Dr. Saul Krugman, undertook a research project at Willowbrook. They wanted to learn about hepatitis and develop a vaccine. To accomplish this, they deliberately infected healthy patients with the virus. Krugman justified these experiments by saying that the children were at high risk of exposure anyway, and that children are much less likely to become symptomatic from the virus. It was reported that parents were told that the only way their child could be admitted to Willowbrook was to consent to the hepatitis study.
Why would you continue to allow people to share a bathrooms with no doors on the stalls when you know 100% of them get hepatitis within 6 months of entering, and when the incidence of intestinal parasites and worms was incredibly high?
During this time, more than 700 children were subjected to these unethical studies. Some were given chocolate milk mixed with the feces of infected patients, and some were directly injected with the virus. Most of the children involved were not treated for their symptoms, and in some cases, serious health complications arose. On top of experimenting on these vulnerable children, the overcrowding, lack of funding, and inadequate staffing led to appalling conditions. The facility struggled with maintaining even the most basic hygiene standards. The living conditions were filthy and unsanitary, the residents squeezed into overcrowded dormitories without adequate access to bathrooms or proper sanitation. The children were often neglected and lacked proper care. Many were left in soiled clothing for long periods, leading to skin infections and other health issues. Numerous reports documented physical, emotional, and sexual abuse by staff members against the residents. The mistreatment included corporal punishment, restraining residents in inhumane ways, and lack of attention to their basic needs. Institutions in general were a lot more common during these times. There were at least 8 psychiatric hospitals in the immediate area. These hospitals were also frequently plagued by the same types of issues. The New York State Department of Mental Hygiene's budget was constantly being cut, and requests to fund minimum staffing and service requirements were frequently denied. There were cases of abuse at these institutions as well. Sometimes people who did not suffer from mental illness or were not developmentally disabled were misdiagnosed as such and mistakenly institutionalized. Some people may wonder, why were institutions for people with disabilities and mental illnesses so common in the past? And why did some parents choose to institutionalize their children? There may be several factors that influence this practice. One possible reason may be the social stigma and discrimination that people with disabilities or mental illnesses faced. Another factor may be that cultural values and norms influenced productivity, individualism, and personal responsibility. People with disabilities or mental illnesses may have been seen as a burden or a liability to society. The social programs that provided support for people with disabilities or mental illnesses may have been limited or conditional, favoring those who could potentially return to work or contribute to society. A third factor may be that the medical model at the time viewed these conditions as defects or diseases that needed to be cured or isolated. The medical professionals who diagnosed and treated people with disabilities and mental illness used terms that would be considered derogatory today. The medical interventions that were available or used may have been ineffective, harmful, or invasive. However, these reasons do not justify the violation of human rights and dignity that people with disabilities and mental illness experience in institutions. Geraldo Rivera hosted an investigative television special focused on the conditions at Willowbrook State School. The program exposed the horrifying conditions and abuse suffered by the residents of the institution, bringing public attention to the issue and contributing to the efforts to shut down the facility in the following years. By the mid-70s, many portions of the adjacent Seaview Hospital were closed and abandoned. Eventually, the Willowbrook State School was closed in 1987. Some buildings were demolished or repurposed, while others remain abandoned. Half of the property was transferred in 1989 to the City University of New York. It's no surprise the legend of Cropsey evolved, a madman lurking in the tunnels of the abandoned institution. Given the real-life horrors that took place at these institutions, they were, and still are, widely believed to be haunted by the spirits of those who died there. Andre Rand was born as Frank Rostam Rushan on March 11, 1944, in Manhattan, New York. He grew up in Ithaca, a rural part of northern New York State. His father died when he was 14 years old, and his mother ended up being institutionalized at Pilgrim Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, New York. He and his sister would visit her there as teenagers. This facility was one of the institutions mentioned earlier, and it wasn't far from Willowbrook. After serving in the Army, he worked as a custodian, orderly, and physical therapy aide at Willowbrook State School from 1966 to 1968 under the name Frank Bruchette. In 1969, he was charged with attempting to kidnap and assault a 9-year-old girl. He lured her into his car and drove to a remote area, but a passing police car interrupted the heinous act, leading to his arrest. He pleaded guilty to the charge and received a 4-year sentence. After serving only a year and a half, Rand was paroled in early 1972. In a curious turn of events, he decided to legally change his name to Andre Rand. However, his new name didn't mean he was turning over a new leaf. A few years later, he was accused of assaulting a young adult woman and a 15-year-old girl, but they declined to press charges. Jumping forward a bit to 1983, when Rand was employed as a school bus driver. In an odd and unsettling event, he picked up a group of 11 children from a Staten Island YMCA and drove them to New Jersey. There, he took them to White Castle, then to watch the planes take off and land at Newark Liberty International Airport. Thankfully, none of the children were harmed during this encounter. Rand served 10 months in jail for unlawful imprisonment. Between his run-ins with the law, Rand often worked on a temporary basis, so his living arrangements were unstable. He sometimes joined other people experiencing homelessness, staying in different encampments scattered across the 5 boroughs of New York City. At times, he even resided in the shadowy tunnels underneath the abandoned Willowbrook State School. During the summer of 1972, Andre Rand was working as a painter at Tyson's Lane Apartments on Staten Island. On the afternoon of July 7th, 5-year-old Alice Pereira was playing in the lobby of the apartment building with her brother. Around 3 p.m., her brother left her alone for just a moment, and when he came back, Alice was nowhere to be found. There were no concrete leads to her whereabouts, the only clue being that she might have been spotted at a nearby park. Initially, authorities suspected the father of taking Alice as a result of a messy divorce, but he was cleared and sadly, Alice simply vanished into thin air. Audrey Lynn Nirenberg was an 18-year-old girl diagnosed with hebephrenic schizophrenia. The origin of the word hebephrenic comes from the Latin hebe, meaning youth, and phreno, meaning mind. It's a form of the illness that occurs in adolescence, and its primary symptom is disorganized thinking. Disorganized thinking can make it hard to plan, start, or finish tasks that require logical or sequential steps such as cooking, cleaning, studying, or working. The person may lose track of what they are doing, get distracted, or abandon the task altogether in the middle of it. Disorganized thinking can also affect a person's ability to communicate effectively with others. The person may have trouble organizing their thoughts into coherent sentences, or may say things that are irrelevant, nonsensical, or contradictory. This can make it hard for others to understand them or respond appropriately. Audrey, given her condition, had tendencies to repeat her actions if she became disoriented, but she always knew to call home if she got lost. In July of 1977, she had been an outpatient at Kingsborough Psychiatric Center and was taking large doses of the antipsychotic Thorazine. On July 5, 1977, she went to the store to get cigarettes just 2 blocks away from home. She left with a promise of a quick return, so she didn't take any ID or medication with her, just the $2 for cigarettes in her purse. The minutes turned into hours, days into years, and Audrey simply vanished. Only the day before, to celebrate the July 4th holiday, her parents took her to the movies at the Jerry Lewis Theater in Staten Island. Near the theater was a homeless encampment. In the early morning of October 24, 1978, a physical therapy aide named Ethel Atwell arrived at work. She parked her car behind Building 47 at the Willowbrook State School. She felt a little nervous in the dimly lit parking lot at 6 a.m., so she quickly locked her car and hurried towards the school. She remembered how Shin Lee, a nurse who worked in Building 11, was killed on her way home only 3 months earlier. Inside the building, 2 of her co-workers were the only ones to hear anything. From their vantage point, they could not see Ethel, but they heard a male voice outside say, "Come on," followed by her reply, "No, you'll beat me." Then they heard her scream. When the police arrived, they found some of her belongings on the ground near her car: her tan purse, an earring, a solitary black shoe, 3 buttons from her coat, and disturbingly, half of her set of dentures. Further away in the woods behind the parking lot, they discovered her car keys. These items are all that remain, and no trace of her has been seen since. On July 15, 1981, at around 9:30 p.m., 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes was last seen at the Port Richmond Deli, buying a bar of Ivory soap. Her mother had sent her on a quick errand, being that it was just 2 blocks away from home. The police investigated, but no one from the neighborhood saw her, including Andre Rand's aunt, who lived in the same apartment building. Holly just never returned from the deli. At only 10 years old, Tiahi's Tijuana Jackson underwent a harrowing experience as her family's apartment tragically burned down. As a result, they had to move into the Mariners Harbor Motel in Staten Island. On August 14, 1983, Tiahi's mother woke up at 4:30 p.m., only to find that her daughter had been missing for 3 hours. On the day in question, Tia Hayes had been sent on an errand by another resident of the hotel to grab some chicken wings from the Crown supermarket. Tia Hayes' mother sometimes saw shady people loitering around the parking lot of the motel, so she made sure to warn her daughter about the dangers posed by predators. Just a half-mile separated the store from the barren Hirsch Cemetery, where people living without homes had set up a campsite. On July 9, 1987, 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger was playing outside her home in the Westerly area of Staten Island. Despite having Down syndrome, Jennifer's parents made efforts to provide her with a normal life. They taught her skills for self-sufficiency, such as dressing herself and doing her own hair. On that particular day, Jennifer's mother needed to clean the pool, so Jennifer decided to take a walk. She was granted the freedom to play within a 3-block radius, and her parents had ensured she knew her address and phone number. Tragically, Jennifer never returned. A search effort was immediately launched, with both the police and volunteers tirelessly scouring the area in search of the vulnerable girl. The search eventually led the police to the grounds of the abandoned Willowbrook State School, following a trail identified by the canine unit. Witnesses in the area reported seeing Jennifer walking hand in hand with a tall man dressed in unkempt clothing. From that point, the trail went cold, but the police already had a suspect in mind. Andre Rand was arrested on August 5, 1987, on suspicion of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. At that time, Jennifer Schweiger was still missing, and the search efforts were ongoing throughout the grounds of the former school. During his arrest, Rand's behavior led the police to suspect that he might be mentally handicapped, leading to a psychiatric evaluation. However, he was eventually deemed fit to stand trial, as it became apparent that his dazed and drooling act was just an act. Tragically, only a week later, Jennifer's remains were discovered in a shallow grave behind one of the abandoned buildings, near the campsite Rand had been using. Despite previous searches, none of her personal belongings were found in that area before. As a result, a murder charge was added to his indictment, and he faced trial for felony murder and first-degree kidnapping. In the U.S. criminal justice system, if a jury cannot reach a verdict on all charges against a defendant, the court can allow them to return a partial verdict on the charges that they do agree on. If the jury is unlikely to agree on the remaining charges, the court may declare a mistrial on those charges and let the partial verdict stand. This is what happened in Andre Rand's case. The jury unanimously agreed on the kidnapping charge, but was divided on the murder charge. Normally, in a mistrial, the charge can be retried. However, in accepting a partial verdict, the judge dismissed the murder charge. It may seem confusing, but because the kidnapping led to the murder, it's considered to be one event. First-degree kidnapping is defined as a kidnapping that results in severe harm or death to the victim, so it carries the same sentence as murder. The judge wanted to ensure that Andre Rand faced justice for his crimes. If the entire trial was thrown out, there was a possibility that Andre Rand could have gone free. Therefore, the judge prevented the state from trying Andre Rand for murder again using this procedure. Andre Rand was sentenced to a minimum of 5 to 25 years and a maximum of life in prison. He would have been eligible for parole in 2008. However, in 2004, he was convicted of the first-degree kidnapping in the case of Holly Ann Hughes. Testimony from his cellmate revealed that Rand confessed to the crime, stating that he admitted to being the suspect mentioned in the newspaper story about her disappearance. Reportedly, Rand held up the paper and stated, "I did this." As a result, he received a second sentence of 25 years to life. Despite extensive investigations, Holly's remains have never been found. Rand is suspected in the abduction cases I mentioned earlier, but no charges have been filed in relation to those incidents. Andre Rand is 79 years old today and will be eligible for parole in 2037. If he lives that long and was granted parole, he would be in his 90s. So Andre Rand is likely to die in prison. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you think Rand is guilty in the other cases he's suspected in? Do you think he will ever confess to anything else? And if you're interested in learning more about this case, check out the 2009 documentary titled Cropsey. The technology and infrastructure of today enable us to be more aware and informed about missing persons. With advancements like GPS, cell phones, security cameras, and amber or silver alerts, we have more means of prevention and faster responses. It is important not to neglect or forget missing people. Educate yourself on prevention, statistics, and how you can contribute to finding missing persons. Take a moment to familiarize yourself with the issue of missing people in your community and raise awareness. It only takes one person to recognize and identify a missing individual. Your help can transform a tragic story into a joyful resolution.